Hey guys, welcome back to the channel with a great writer from the likes of Batman the Outsiders to American Carnage to the big screen and home screen of Zone 414. So everyone, please welcome Bryan Hill. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing not too bad. Just day by day, reading, working, writing, day.
That's all you can do, man. That's all you can do. Just take it day by day.
All right. So let's see who's in the chat real quick. I got Maranya. How you doing, Maranya? Tahilim. Oh, dude, Tahilim is like constantly on every stream at the same time, and I don't know how he does
it. Some people just have it like that,
Yeah.
All good.
So I'm gonna say this now. People in the chat, post your questions because we'll get to those near the end when we're done talking.
For sure.
Yeah. Also, if you're in the chat, please share it out. Always fun having a nice crowd. So we're gonna get started with your origin. How'd you get into writing?
Oh man. Well, when I was a kid, I didn't have like a terrible childhood or something. It just had some difficult things. Like my dad died when I was about 7 years old, and that shifted the ground underneath my feet because mortality was something that I was very aware of growing up. And I think that may be a little philosophical, even as like a young kid. And so I read a lot.
Nice.
Try to understand things. And that's when I got in the comics because, Bruce's parents were dead. My dad was dead. I know what it's like to sit by the gravestone and try to find, solace and all that stuff. So I got very into Batman. But I wasn't, set on being a storyteller. Really, I thought I was going to be in the FBI. I wanted to catch serial killers. I read Thomas Harris's work when I was about 12 or 13. Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, really?
That stuff. Yep. And I got really fascinated with human psychology. With trying to understand what motivates people, especially like the darker side of human motivation. It sort of felt really interesting to me. So that's why I thought I was going to go. And then when I was about senior in high school, my mother realized I was very serious about it and really preferred that I do something where I didn't have a gun.
Nice.
I had a gun. That means other people had guns. And then, so I was like, well, okay, I understand that. And I didn't know, when the more I looked into Quantico, I realized I could get stuck in a basement looking at cell phone transcripts for 10 years. It's not like I would go to Quantico, come out, and then suddenly I'm Will Graham and I'm catching the Tooth Fairy. It was more like, oh, they can put me where they want to put me. So I was an English kid, writing kid, history kid, all that. And I really found a love of cinema my last year of high school. I mean, I like Star Wars and stuff the kids like, but really thinking about filmmaking as an art form kind of struck then. So I was like, all right, well, I'll try to go to film school, and if I get in, I'll go. And so I applied to NYU and went there. Really too broke to go to NYU. It's a very expensive school. And I struggled to get through NYU. It was a very, very difficult time for me. But when I got out of it, I didn't have the money to make film. Barely had the money to finish school. So I wrote because that was the cheapest way I could create a portfolio for myself.
Exactly.
And I decided okay, well, this was actually in film school when I realized you're not going to come out of film school and someone's going to hand you a job to direct a movie. There's no guarantee of that. I mean, some kids, got opportunities like that, but they were rich going in, so they could sort of pay their way to that opportunity. I knew I didn't have that advantage. So it seemed like the more logical thing to do would be to write screenplays, to get very good at that. Because then I'm creating a product that could maybe sell to someone and help build my career rather than asking someone to trust me to be able to execute something, right? I just felt more pragmatic to give people just a script because anyone could write a script. The script is done. It doesn't really matter where it came from. It doesn't matter if you want it. So yeah, that's when I started writing and bumped into comic book guys when I was still in New York, and they became good friends of mine, and that kind of got me into comics, over a long period of people telling me to go away. I finally, got a couple things on the shelf, and then everything was just building it from there. I'm a Taurus, right? So I don't get overnight success in my life. I get a lot of just, I get a lot of 10-yard plays.
slow build-ups and stuff.
My life is a series of like 4.5 yard plays. Sometimes
And,
sometimes I get 10-yarder, but I don't. I never catch it and then run it all the way in. That is not how it goes for me.
And I that does kind of remind me of I listened to you on someone else's interview, and they said you said that you had a book or a transcript of a movie you were writing, and
Yeah.
and then 9/11 happened.
Sure did. Yep. No, it's a funny story. So I had a crush on a girl for a while, but it wasn't really, it wasn't even a crush on her. It was like a crush on who I projected onto her,
Oh,
in that phase of like adolescence, right? And I wrote about that experience. I originally wrote it as a screenplay. And a lot of what I do to exercise negative people out of my world, right, is I write about it and I get rid of it, right?
Exactly.
And
it's a sort of therapy.
Yeah, and this wasn't like a negative person. It was just like it was stupid feelings I need to let go. So I wrote it to like get rid of it, and I put it in the screenplay and submitted it to Project Greenlight, this like screenwriting competition.
Nice.
That was a bigger deal back in the 90s. It was the Matt Damon, Ben Affleck thing. I don't know if they still do it.
Really?
But yeah, it was a whole thing where you could like write a script and submit it, and they could like, kind of go through the thing. And if it went all the way through, you would be on the show and you could make your movie. It was whatever. So I wrote it and submitted it and got through a few rounds and got some feedback on it. Ultimately didn't get all the way through. But a lot of the feedback said that the prose was pretty good. So I was like, okay, that's cool. Thanks for saying that. And then you're sitting in the screenplay that you don't know what to do with, right? I was like, well, maybe I'll try writing a novel. I was reading Chuck Palahniuk at the time. I read Fight Club, and I remember I read an interview with Chuck Palahniuk, and Palahniuk said that Fight Club started with chapter 5, I think, which was the this is Fight Club, right?
Making the rules and
all
stuff
the
like
rules
that.
like do not talk about Fight Club, like all that stuff, right? So he said it started with that, and then he built a novel around it. And I was like, okay, that's interesting.
That's a great idea now that I think about it.
Yeah, and if you go back and read Fight Club and you read that chapter, you can see how like you could do that, how you could write that. And then so I just decided to try to write a novel. And so I just split the script up with Post-it notes into what I believe were chapters, and I wrote those things out. And yes, that novel did eventually get an offer from Simon & Schuster. I got an agent from that whole thing.
Wow, that's a big company.
Oh yeah, I thought I was done. Not done, but I thought I had like leveled up,
Nice.
And Monday I got the call that happened. Wednesday I was supposed to sign the contract, and then on Tuesday it was 9/11.
Oh, dude, that's like a miracle disaster. I can't think of the other word.
It was so wild because I was living in Queens at the time, and I woke up that morning. See, when I got the call that I'd sold the novel, I called into my temp job and just said, I'm sick, I'm not going to be in. Because I was like, why am I going to this temp job? Like, I sold a book. I'm an author now. I can stop working in the mailroom of this place in Fifth Street. And so I was sleeping in that morning. And I woke up because every phone in the apartment building I was in was ringing at the same time.
It's like a world ending, dude.
Yeah, it was like, because everyone had ground lines back then, right? So I woke up to that and the whole thing went down. And then I got the email that they wouldn't be honoring the contract because 9/11 was considered force majeure, act of God.
Right.
And my book was now too dark for what they believed the public consciousness was.
Well, basically the biggest terrorist event in American history happened. So everyone wants something hopeful.
Yeah, and look, you're dwarfed by history. In no way did I think my little small personal career considerations were as important. I was horrified and mortified like everybody else was. But yeah. So, that went down. But that actually led to my screenwriting career because I eventually ran out of money, had to get out of New York, go back to St. Louis where I'm from.
Yep.
And I was just really down on myself, thinking like, this might not work out. Like you might need to do something else while you still have time to do something else.
And like you're also like I'm guessing in debt from student loans from NYU.
Oh, for sure. I was broke
I'm
most
in
of
that position right now.
my life. Yeah, like just like, you know, I had debt to deal with. It just had a lot, right? And I just felt a billion miles away, you know, from where I wanted to be. So I made a pact with myself. I was like, all right, man, you're gonna write one more screenplay. And if nothing happens with this screenplay, pack it up. Maybe teach or something or whatever it is. Like just figure something out with your life. And so I wrote a screenplay about everything I was feeling at the time, about my lack of self-worth, about wanting to quit, about my loneliness, my isolation. But I put it inside of an action thriller, like an action thriller road movie.
Can you name the movie?
Oh, the script was called Roland's Blues. And the concept was there was a guy that used to be a badass gun for hire who stopped because his wife had gotten killed. And he's like on the verge of like just kind of crashing his whole life into a brick wall. When woman shows up and says, "Hey, I need you to help me deliver this case from here to this other place. And if you do that, you know, you'll get a decent amount of money on the other side of it. But there's somebody chasing me who wants to kill me. And if you get involved in it, they want to kill you too." And so guy says like, "Yeah, I'll go ahead and do it." And it's basically a road chase movie.
Nice.
But the twist at the end is the woman that hired him to deliver the case was actually the ghost of his dead wife.
Oh,
And
that's actually a cool twist.
she came back to kind of wake him up and get him to be heroic again. And the villain that's chasing him the entire time that he's fighting like a Terminator is actually like divine help that's part of the same plan, right?
Oh, wow.
So, and it was like kind of there's a film by Adrian Lynn I'm a huge fan of called Jacob's Ladder. And I believe Bruce Joel Rubin wrote it, who is the same writer of Ghost, strangely enough. They're very different movies.
The Swayze movie.
Yeah, Jacob's Ladder is kind of a horror movie directed by Adrian Lynn. Adrian Lynn is the director of 9.5 Weeks, Flashdance.
Nice.
What's the one? Woody Harrelson, Demi Moore, Indecent Proposal. So Jacob's Ladder is also like a deviation for Adrian because, you know, Lynn's work tend to be, you know, about intimacy, human relationships. This was a horror movie. And in the horror movie, you have a guy, Jacob Singer, played by Tim Robbins, who sees demons all around him until he realizes that they might not be demons. And I don't want to ruin it because it's a great movie. But it was, you know, kind of influenced by that picture. So I wrote that movie. I bled into it. You know, like when I write, writing for me is the same feeling I have when I write music. It's just super emotional, right?
Right.
So I just bled into that script. And I'm sure the script is a mess, but there was something in it that carried over to the reader. And eventually that script got optioned. And option is not when you sell a script. It's when a producer gives you a smaller amount of money in the hopes of being able to get your movie made. And then you would get a bigger amount of money later on, right? And I think at the time it was like $5,000 or something. But it was the first $5,000 I'd ever made writing.
That's important.
You know,
that probably like sparked you to like go,
totally.
Well, I could do this. And so what'd you do after that? Once you go, oh man, I could do this, and someone saw this and saw the potential in me. What'd you do after that? Well,
you know, there's kind of, it's also part of that story, right? So that script wound up in the hands of Dolph Lundgren, strangely enough. Dolph liked it and read it, wanting to find a writer to write an idea that he had. And he talked to me about it. I got to talk to him on the phone about it.
The Mechanist?
What's that?
Was it called the Mechanist or something like that?
It eventually became The Mechanic, right? It was called the Russian Specialist somewhere in some territories. In some territories, it's The Mechanic. But eventually, that script led me to Dolph, which led me to that. And the real, like, you can do it moment happened when, so Dolph flew me out to Spain. He was living in Spain at the time.
Oh, that's a dream.
Yeah, he was living in Marbella, Spain, which is a kind of a resort part of Spain. It's where all the rich British kids go to hang out.
Nice.
And it's very close to Greece, southern part of Spain. So it's, you know, it's very Mediterranean.
Okay.
And the walk from the hotel to the office where I'd meet Dolph, you could walk along the beach. And just go there. I remember one morning I woke up and I did the walk and I could see the Rock of Gibraltar peeking out of the sea.
Wow.
And just thinking that, like, I got here because of an idea I had in St. Louis, Missouri when I was going for a run, and it taught me that you do not know what will come from creative inspiration and urges, right? That you just have to follow that inspiration. And what it did was it unshackled my mind's sense of possibility. And I think a lot of what was holding me back was I thought I understood what was possible and impossible. And then I realized that I didn't. I didn't know what was possible and impossible. And then the only thing that I could really trust was the creative instinct I had to do a thing. Because if I hadn't had written down that idea when I got done with that run, and if I hadn't gone back to it the next day and turned it into an outline while I was working at a video store or something, like stocking shelves, constantly thinking about it, I never would have gotten to that point, right? So that experience gave me a lot of fortitude. And it took 5 or 6 years after that to get me like really going in terms of being like a professional creator, and this is how I can pay my rent and all of that. But the journey, just knowing that something that was started so small could yield so much in my life, that just gave me everything I needed to keep going.
I feel like that's like every writer. Like every writer has that urge to, I can't do anything else. This is what I have to do. And if I don't do this, I'll just die, because without writing, they're nothing.
Yeah. For me, like expressing myself creatively is something that's very important to me. But I'll admit that I never self-identified as a writer, really.
Is that because of the imposter syndrome?
It was really because I was a filmmaker. For me, writing was always what I could do because I couldn't make movies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. So it wasn't
you had that self-doubt.
Yeah, it wasn't so. It was like it's like I wanted to make movies. I couldn't afford to make movies, but I could write movies. Right. So I started to write movies because most of the directors that I really admired were writer directors. We're talking like Jim Cameron, Michael Mann.
Exactly. And you love Michael Mann.
Michael Mann's my favorite filmmaker, right? So, I was the guy that was buying screenplays from the table in New York and studying the prose, and I would retype Michael Mann's screenplays so I could understand the feeling of writing in that style, right? Wow. Just like how to put those words together and that kind of thing. And so writing for me was always utilitarian. It was always a way to express, but not necessarily, how I self-defined. Not that I had any problem with being a writer. I just I view myself as an artist who uses different forms. Okay. And I say that because I don't have a love of one over the other. Like you go to my Instagram page, then I'm a photographer there, because my Instagram page is largely about my photography. I'm a huge fan of a photographer named Peter Lindbergh. I've heard of that before. Yeah, he did fashion photography in the 90s. And he's kind of known for giving us the rise of the supermodel, all that stuff. But if you go to my Instagram page, it looks like I'm a photographer. And I have people that contact me as if I am a photographer who have no idea that I write television, write movies, write comics. So
if nothing else works out, at least you can go to photography.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in just expressing yourself in all the ways that you think are interesting. If you go to my Instagram and click down, you'll see some music that I've been working on, right? And so
why stop at one thing?
Yeah, I just think it's and I used to love people like John Carpenter. He was a hero of mine growing up because he wrote films, directed films, did his own music, and I was like, that's cool, man. Even like more recently.
Oh, Taika, Taika, he does everything in his
Taika. Like Taika's, yeah, exactly. Like he's so involved in all those different parts. There's a filmmaker from the 90s, an independent filmmaker named Mike Figgis, who directed Leaving Las Vegas.
Oh, really?
Nicolas Cage and Elizabeth Shue, right? And he did the music for the movie, or at least wrote like some of the jazz stuff for the film, as well as directing it and adapting the screenplay from John O'Brien's novel.
Or even recent independent filmmakers, Jim Jarmusch.
Yeah, Jarmusch is, and remember I went to NYU, so I was very much in the mentality of you may have to do it yourself. All right. So you might not have the resources to just hire people. So you might need to learn how to do it, right?
Be everything. So when the one thing you study the most fails, you can go to something else, which may lead you back to that one thing you like.
Yeah, and then you're never hung up in a process because you can't afford someone else, right? Like, I know plenty of people that got together enough money to make a micro budget feature, but then they get to editing and they don't really know how to cut, or they get to, even if they do know how to cut, they usually get to sound design and music. And then they don't know how to write their own music. They can't afford to license music. They don't understand sound design because they never tried to do it. They can't afford mixing. And then your movie kind of languishes in post because you don't have the money to finish the thing. So I always wanted to at least feel like, even though I'm not John Williams, I know my way around a synthesizer. So if I had to write the music for something, I have a style in which I could write it, but that's just how my nature is. I don't like being dependent on anything. I like being as independent as I possibly can.
So things can get done. That's
right, so
that's a true creator right there.
Because I'm not, no one is going to care as much about my project, whatever project it is, as I do.
Right.
Like, I'm going to be the one who's going to sleep for 2 hours a night for a week because I really want the chord progression in this one thing to be right, or I don't like the way the bass is hitting, or something is dissonant between the emotion on screen and what the emotion, I'm not going to expect anyone I hire to be as obsessive about it as I am, right? So if I really want it to be to the point in detail, then I need to be the one doing it, or I need to have so many resources at my disposal that dealing with me is lucrative, so I can be as annoying as I know I probably would be.
Exactly. So we'll get back to writing, but a lot of people here are for the comic books. So let's get into, I got 2 comic books I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
Before we get into our final one, which is just a lot of writing questions, because that's me. All right, let's talk Batman and the Outsiders. I spent my free time this week reading a character I don't find that interesting. I'm not a big fan of the character Batman the Outsider. I mean, Batman. I know I'm the minority in this, but I'm not a big fan of Batman. But this was very interesting. I actually liked Batman and the Outsiders. And I'm not saying that to kiss your ass or anything. I actually truly liked it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have read 19 issues.
yeah, for sure.
But it's fun seeing Batman not in this role of, you will listen to me because I'm Batman.
Yeah.
You have this dynamic of, I'm going to let you make your own choices and I'll plan to run that.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do, like every writer vehicles their personal philosophy in their work, sometimes actively or not. And I'm sort of a hands-off, let people make their own choices, and observe the consequences kind of the guy. I'm not really dictatorial, and maybe I just mapped that into Bruce Wayne a little bit. But everyone has their own version of Bruce. I mean, Bruce is like the Hamlet of comics. Every actor that plays the character will do it differently. Every writer that writes the character will do it differently.
I think there's a writer, I don't remember his name, but a writer said this one time, no matter what story is being told in Batman, if it's a Western, if it's a noir, or if it's just a futuristic sci-fi, everyone finds Batman in every part of any genre.
Yeah, I think so. Because Batman is unique in comics with the way it interfaces with so many different genre things. And you can build a Batman story based on any of those things that you think is interesting. I mean, there's a James Bond version of a Batman story, but there's also a very kind of low-tech horror version of a Batman story. Scott's work, his early work, is very
his Court of Owls, definitely, and that's my favorite story ever told, Batman.
Like the horror space, right? And then you have like the kind of hyperbolic, satirical poetry of Frank Miller, which is also very Batman, right?
Yep.
So Batman allows, I think, a lot of interpretations that are all true to the character. But when it came to Batman and the Outsiders, initially I didn't want to do it.
Why not?
I felt like it was checking a box. Black Lightning was on television. We should probably do Outsiders. Frankly, I felt like because I was a writer of color, I was the easy call to make.
So do you think they called
know?
you because you were a person of color?
Maybe. At first I was suspicious, honestly.
Okay.
Because it's like, that's what you do, right? Like, well, we have this person of color character. We want to get a writer of color to write them. Bryan has written some comics, you know.
And that's what Christopher Priest said. He said he doesn't want to be the black writer only working on black characters.
Well, you know, and Priest's words were well taken by me. You know, it's something I always kind of kept in mind. And it's not really how the rest of my career goes, right? Like, I mean, I write a whole host of things, but I didn't want to be like the February call, you know? So I was pretty dubious at first. But then I had a conversation with Chris Conroy, the editor, about it.
Okay, nice.
And the way he elucidated his perspective on it, it didn't seem like a piece of business gig. And it seemed like I would have some real space to do some things. And so that got a little more exciting, you know, and then thinking through like Katana, you know, for instance, and working with her, because I, you know, had never really done that before, but I found myself with perspective about her, you know, and Duke Thomas, and, you know, I could bring in, you know, Lady Shiva, you know, so like once those things started to become a reality, writing Ra's al Ghul, like then I got
Roz.
Yeah, or Roz. Yeah. You know, like I'm a Ra's guy because I grew up on the cartoon and it was Ra's in the cartoon.
Yeah. I'm a Roz guy, not because of Christopher Nolan, but because of the English language. There's no sh in the
Well, see, I always thought that it wasn't like a real language, right? So I never traced the etymology of the Al Ghul family to any real language. I thought it was like, you know, a comic book language that was a derivative of this and that. So when they said Ra's in the cartoon, I was like, cool, that's how that's pronounced, fine. But yes, Rosalind Al Ghul. Yeah, so once those characters started to surface and I could play with them, then it got more interesting. And then I looked at Black Lightning, and I will admit, I was not a huge Black Lightning fan going into the book. I didn't dislike the character.
Me too.
I just didn't know much about the character. Literally, I remember the Sinbad skit from Saturday Night Live when he comes in and he's like, Black Lightning, you know, and I remember that. And I knew there was a television show, and I know fellas that worked on the show. So I seen a couple of the show, and I was like, okay, you know, the show is kind of cool. But I didn't have like a deep, resonant feeling towards Black Lightning. Always respect Tony and Isabella and his work. Knew enough about the character. And I read a lot of Tony's work. And I had to figure out my way into it. And then once I could understand Jefferson Pierce in a way that felt real to me, then it became more interesting. You know, to be able to take this character and loosen some of the rules on him a little bit. You know, and again, this is the screenwriting part of me. You know, thinking like, okay, like if you're going to write Black Lightning and get Jamie Foxx to play Black Lightning, what would you be writing in a script? If you were going to get Michael Jordan to play Black Lightning, how would you know, what kind of dimension would you want to put in there for an actor, right? Because ultimately, like I started writing for actors, and actors like to play dimension on the page. So
that's a good piece of advice.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I write for people, right? So I thought about Jefferson, and I'm like, well, you know what? He's a little buttoned up for me. I want to get outside of that, and I want to see what happens when he loses his temper. I want to see what happens when he's tempted by this. I want to see him bounce off of that, you know, and take what Tony had done, which I still have a deep respect for, but also kind of when Frank wrote Dark Knight Returns, postmodernism hit comics in a way, right? It was powerful deconstruction and construction at the same time.
I consider that like the beginning of the deconstruction era of comics.
The problem is every character didn't get the treatment, right? So like Bruce got the characterization, and even Clark got that characterization out of that, you know, and and Oliver and other characters kind of stemming from the Miller. But like a character like Black Lightning never really got taken through that threshold. So they were still kind of working with the sort of pre-Frank Miller, pre-deconstruction characterization where, characters, just the heroes had less flaw.
Exactly.
And I understand.
Because this is still DC where every character is a myth, basically.
So I wanted to dimensionalize him and take what was there, the essence of what was there, the details of it, but also like play with it a little bit. And so, for instance, I know that Tony got a little upset with me that I didn't have the marriage, as part of my Outsiders run.
Oh, which marriage?
Black Lightning.
And who?
I forgot her name. I'm bad with names. It's not that I don't care about it, so I forgot what her name was. But
good.
yeah, I'm terrible. I will forget Lois Lane if you ask me 3 times. So don't take that personally. I write a lot of things, got a lot of character names in my head. Good. But
if people know, write it in the chat.
Thank you. Lynn was her name. And I gathered that, right? So like I could have Jefferson in this thing since I was able to kind of work with the continuity a little bit. But like having a character that is in a relationship with a character that we will never see because they have to travel with the Outsiders, they have to do all this other stuff. Like that didn't seem that interesting to me to do. It would lock off possibilities. So what I decided was, well, there's no reason why he had to be married to her now. Like that could happen later. This could be
now
before
when they were married. Was that New 52 or pre 52?
Oh gosh, I think that was New 52. No, maybe pre 52. It's pre 52. I think kind of soft carried over, I guess. But it didn't seem like a hard and fast necessary thing to do. And I wanted
his rebirth.
Yeah, I wanted to explore how he felt as a man. And then I looked at Katana, and she has kind of the same thing going on in a way where she is betrothed to the ghost of a husband that lives in her sword.
And I love that dynamic between their romance too, because she's like, we both have feelings for each other. We probably shouldn't do it right now. And also my husband is still there, kind of.
Yeah, and I thought the complication of that was interesting and very human. Like we talk about adult themes in comics a lot. And unfortunately, I think when we say adult themes, usually it's, there's graphic violence. Thank you, Eric. They were divorced in the original Isabella run. There's graphic violence or like, frank sexuality and that kind of thing. And yeah, those are adult things. But when I think of adult kind of oriented themes, I think about what are the emotional complications that happen in adulthood. And to be frank, kids are growing up a lot faster than I grew up.
Yeah.
I think a 13-year-old knows a lot more about the world, has been hurt by the world in many more ways than I was when I was 13.
Which goes against Blake's poem of The Tiger and the Lamb. We should try to keep them as innocent as possible for as long as we can.
Well, I mean, when you have access to all the information in the world on your phone, it's hard to do it, right? Like a kid can spend 2 hours searching Google and come out with a hair in their chest. So, I feel like young people, both young readers who are wrestling with the world can embrace adult thematics, but also older readers who want to see something reflective of where they are can embrace it. And male-female relationships are complicated. Desire is complicated, right? And I thought there was room to play that because the Outsiders, they don't have to be the Justice League in the sense that it wraps up in a nice little bow, right? It can be a little messy. They can be a messy group of characters, and that was interesting. So once I started vocalizing those ideas to Chris, and Chris responded to them, and eventually it became Dave Weiglos who took over from Chris when Chris moved on to Black Label. The book became something I was genuinely interested in doing because it didn't feel like I was just, the box check. It felt like I had a little room to play, and I had talked to Tom and Scott about what I wanted to do with Bruce, and they were both very supportive of that. Tom is a good friend of mine, been enormously supportive of me coming into comics, and so he was all for it. So when all those things lined up, then it became interesting, and I wanted to go ahead and do it.
It's cool to see, and with Katana, and it started with Katana, and then it branched out to everyone else in the Outsiders group. It felt like everyone was starting to understand the Bushido.
Yeah.
It felt like everyone was starting to get it, and I'm guessing you read this too, the Code of the Samurai or the Bushido.
Well, sure. Well, I'm a martial artist as well.
Oh, really?
And
Don't try to
yeah.
fight with this guy.
Well, no. And even though I haven't studied a lot of the Japanese arts, honestly, I know some judo that I picked up from a friend of mine who was a hardcore into Budo and judo. When I was taekwondo growing up, which is a bit more of a sport, but it was good for me because it kept me limber and fast. So, even though I'm kind of a sturdy guy, I move well because taekwondo forced me to, even though a lot of the stuff is impractical. But then I started getting into more practical arts like judo, hapkido, that kind of stuff. And then you start a little bit. It's hard to find. When I was really studying hard, I was in Missouri. And you have a lot of phony schools, in Missouri.
Everywhere, dude.
So it was, it's like, what are you getting? Like my taekwondo teacher, Kwang Young Nim, Young Shul Ro, taught the Olympic team. So I was getting very good sport combat training, basically.
Yeah, my dad was in. My dad was stationed in Okinawa when he was in the military, and he was taught there by one of the elders. I don't even know,
like Kyokushin or something like that.
Something like that. It was a long time. It was before I was born. And so when I was born and started getting into football and stuff like that, he goes, "You want to play football? All right." And then he taught me Wing Chun, which is just, for people who don't know, Wing Chun is just using your momentum against you. And it's really nothing about attack. It's really just about self-defense. And it's really good when you have two people rushing each other and you can just get right past them. And it's really cool. And I want to, real quick, before we move on to American Carnage, I have to say, I haven't read a Signal book that I kind of liked or felt character development with. So seeing this guy who's new to the DC mythos go through his mentality of, well, I don't just want to be another Robin, a guy who fights in the dark, and you wrote in there that he is the signal for the day. He's, when Batman's at night, I'm there at day.
Well, when I think maybe a couple months before I really started scripting on Outsiders, I put in a tweet out just asking people about Duke Thomas and what mattered about Duke Thomas to them. Because that's another thing that I like to do. So writing comics is different than writing my original characters. If I write a screenplay, it's full of original characters, I just kind of do what I want to do. And I'm doing it like half for me, half for an audience. It helps me kind of, get thoughts out.
Nice.
When I'm writing library characters, I do think it's very important that I know why people like the characters, at least as much as I can, so that I'm creating something interesting to me, but I'm also not breaking the character for the reader. Okay. Because the last thing I want is someone to spend their hard-earned money on a book that I wrote that has a character in it that they generally like, and then to read it and then feel like, rah, and I got a little bit of that in Fallen Angels. Like, people didn't really like what I did with Psylocke, or it was Laura. They didn't really like where I was taking X-23. And I can totally understand that, and I think in that case, I was not on the same frequency with the latest stuff and was more interested in ideas and thematics that they felt Laura had left behind before, which is absolutely justified.
Right.
It's just kind of I think that was a case where I was just really dissonant with where the fan base was at the time. And even though I wrote something that was honest from my desk, it wasn't, I think, what a lot of X fans wanted from that. And sometimes it's the wrong writer on the wrong thing. And I think that was a case of the wrong writer on the wrong thing.
Well, a lot of people here really liked it. They thought, I appreciate it. Ash said it was the, if I could scroll up and find it, whatever. He said it was the best Dawn of X book.
Well, I appreciate that, Ash. And a lot of people have reached out to me positively about it. And I do like the work. It's just, I think people who had not been familiar with me, maybe they hadn't read my DC work or any of that, and they were just Marvel people that read me for the first time. some of them got the impression that I wanted to deconstruct what they loved, and that is just not how I roll. Like
it doesn't seem like everything I've read of you. It doesn't feel like you're a deconstructive person. It feels like you're more of a reconstructive person, because every person on a book is like, well, I'm going to deconstruct and break them down to build them back up. But you're like, from what I've read, is just there's been a lot of that. Let's just add to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, deconstruction is like this postmodern, I guess, instinct that can exhaust me a little bit, because you can deconstruct something away from what really matters about it. So, when it came to Duke Thomas, I liked the character in general, but I didn't really understand what people were really passionate about, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just asked people. The reason why I like to be so communicative on Twitter is I like to know why people love what they love, because I might be working on it.
That's a good thing. Well, that's why you keep your DMs open, right?
I do, because I've got a lot of people throwing me Power Rangers like feelings, and look, I can't take story details because legal reasons.
Are you doing Power Rangers?
Yeah, I'm writing the movie. So
what?
The announcement came out like last week or something. So, and I'm working with Jonathan Entwistle, director of I'm Not Okay With This, who's a great filmmaker, really, really strong story.
Now, is it a reboot or is it just add-on?
I really can't share details about it. It's cool, is all I can say at the moment.
Okay, we'll just leave it there, because I don't want to
leave it there. But the point of it is, like, I really want to honor what people love about things, and so when I'm working on something and I'm like, I need to know a little bit more about Duke to find what people liked. And so I heard some feedback, and I had planned to take him on a very long journey. Unfortunately, the book didn't get the second year that was really going to focus on Duke, because the first year was a lot about Jefferson and Bruce and kind of solidifying.
I wanted to read more about Duke.
Yeah, I mean, I had plans for Katana, plans for Duke, Shiva. I had a bunch of them kind of laid out, but you never know how long
the book. The first year was really about Black Lightning.
It was because he's I felt like he needed the most attention. The reader needed to have a very clear understanding of who Jefferson was. And the beauty of working on a team book is you can rotate the spotlight. Mm-hmm. So, you can sort of pitch shift over to Cassandra, or pitch shift over to Duke or something, and then deal with that. So I did have more plans. So for Duke Thomas fans that are out there, I did have more I wanted to do with him. But the good thing is there's a very good writer named Brandon Thomas. I think he's doing a smaller story with outsiders in it, and maybe doing more stuff, but things that were set in motion have not fully gone away. They will just materialize in other things. And I might even return to that world to do a mini series or something in the, medium future. So
awesome.
We'll see.
All right, let's go. All right. We got about 15 minutes. Just American Carnage. Where'd that come from? We'll just do that quickly. Where'd that come from?
Well, honestly, Vertigo reached out to me when they were doing the 25th anniversary thing and asked me if I wanted to throw a book in there. And I was like, I don't know. I don't really have like a magical realism book to do, which is what I associated Vertigo with.
Right. Like gaming and stuff.
Detectives, or like, fairies as police officers or something, right? Like that's what I thought Vertigo was. I didn't really have that. But I've always been a tremendous fan of Bryan Azzarello's 100 Bullets.
Okay, yes.
And Azzarello was very kind to me when I came into comics. And so I wanted to do like a crime story. And Vertigo wanted to do something a little topical. And so I told him, like, okay, I can, but I don't want to do something that has one point of view where I'm standing on a soapbox and I'm screaming at the reader to believe what I want to believe. Right?
That's appreciative, because like in it, like you had like the FBI agent going to different people from the alt-right to the very left governors, and she goes, no one threw it in my face for the color of my race until you just did right now, and that's why I vote Republican.
Yeah. Like I don't want to tell people how to think. I like telling stories.
Right.
And then people can figure out how they think for themselves, right?
Exactly.
So, and what was interesting about that it wasn't really me as black writer wanting to write about racism. Not that I have a problem with that, but honestly, go read James Baldwin. Don't read Bryan Hill, right? Like, if you want to read literature about racism, there's a million writers who have already put books out in the library that are much better than anything I could do.
Kill a Mockingbird.
So, yeah, To Kill a Mockingbird. You can read Chester Himes if you're looking for a writer of color. Like I said, James Baldwin. Just read James Baldwin. So that didn't interest Alex Haley. That didn't interest me at all. But I really wanted to write like the experience of an FX series, like where you're inside a subculture with these dangerous people and all of this. And so that's really what American Carnage was. It was like, okay, what if it's a little hyperbolic, right? Just like The Shield is a little hyperbolic, just like, Sons of Anarchy, hyperbolic, right? But I wanted to play around in that world, and I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could humanize characters in that way. And on top of it, I really wanted an excuse to go talk to white supremacists.
So you went out and actually talked to white supremacists?
I did.
The balls on Bryan Hill.
I didn't talk to Aryan Brotherhood because you don't mess with those guys. But what I did was I talked to friends of mine who were involved in those kinds of social issues. And at first, first thing I did is I went to message boards with a pseudonym.
Okay.
And then I didn't get anything useful there. I was like, well, this isn't particularly interesting. It's a lot of venting, but I'm like, I can't really write this, right? So then I contacted friends of mine, and it's they daisy chain you. So the first people you talk to are people that used to be in the movement but are out of the movement, and will talk to you about their experience. But then you ask those people, do you know someone who is in the movement who would talk to me? Mm-hmm. And then sometimes they wouldn't put someone up, and sometimes they would, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess that is like the Will Graham taking it full circle. When I was telling you about the FBI, mm-hmm. It wasn't like to lock people up or set people up. I'm genuinely interested in what motivates people, and Curiosity. I'm really curious about it, right? And I sat down and had conversation with people, and I got a range of different experiences. I got people that were trying to trigger me, and then they discovered that it wasn't easy to trigger me because it's not. And then you would have a conversation, about what pressure they felt on themselves, or what happened to their brother in the war, how he came back different.
I heard you spoke to a friend of yours when you were kids, and then they just lost contact.
And that was the other step of it. Is a friend of mine from childhood. I'd lost contact with them. They were everyone's really close when you're a kid. And then I bumped into them later on. This was before the book, though. This was years ago. Okay. And they had radicalized into a skinhead, basically.
Oh wow!
Sad. Yo, that's cray. And so then I obviously didn't have a conversation with them at the point, but I knew their family, and I checked in with family and said, hey, what's going on with so and so? Would they be willing to talk to me? And set something up, and I sat down and talked to them. And for me, it was sad because suddenly someone like you cared about growing up turned into a Sith, so it's felt like Obi-Wan Kenobi for a while. But I'm really interested in how people are manipulated, how we're manipulated with our own emotions, with our own fears, how the assault on self-esteem that our culture is, what that seeds in people. And that's really what American Carnage is about.
And if you kind of just see people who are really good at manipulating people, they have a firm grasp of the fundamentals of psychology.
Totally.
And it's gaslighting. They know what triggers you, but they also know what makes you feel. So it's kind of sad how they can abuse something that they know.
Well, and look, extremity breeds more extremity, breeds more extremity, breeds more extremity, right? And I think, if there's anything about the world in general that I would want for it, it's for everyone to calm down.
Yeah.
Because if if you're extreme, the other side's going to be extreme, whatever side that is. And then you're going to be extreme in response to their extremity. And it just keeps building and building and building and building and building until the only way we communicate is by yelling at each other.
Yep.
Right.
And that's what I feel like people have forgotten, or because of like the Gen X's and millennials, they grew up with chat rooms where they could just yell at each other and not do it face to face. So they lost that trigger where if I yell at you in person, I could probably get punched. So they just.
Well, I think it is the anonymity and the relative safety of harsh discourse on the internet. But I think what also presents itself is when I was growing up, my friend circle was largely, and by largely I mean 99.9%, comprised of people I knew in real life.
Nice. Right?
Like I knew them. They were human beings. I knew them. So I had to kind of deal with that in a real three-dimensional way. And I didn't have the ability to escape into a digital subculture that justified everything I felt all of the time. I always had to wrestle with different points of view. It was very hard to bubble myself growing up. And I think now it's so easy to bubble yourself. Because if I wake up one day and I say, I want to set my toes on fire, I'm sure I could spend an hour on Google and get into the fire toe Reddit. And I would get a bunch of, instructions on how to best set your toes on fire. And now these are my people who are justifying everything I want to do, right? Because they want to set their toes on fire. I want to set their toes on fire. And suddenly the people who don't have burning feet, they're the enemy. They're wrong, right? And so like the flame virgins now are my enemy because we are all toe burners. And that's what happens. And if you spend all your time in that community, then, that
you're
starts
your closest friends.
That's your whole circle. That's your prism. That's how you look through things, right? Well, growing up, I never had that ability to do that. It wasn't like I chose not to do it because I was so brave. Literally could not. Just because if I wanted to know people, I had to know different people. Exactly. And then you have to separate what someone will say they believe in if they write it down on a piece of paper with how they'll treat you as an individual in life. Right? So that, I don't think, growing up in that environment in that way, it never leaves you. So what I was interested with American Carnage, and I mean, I used American Carnage because a little kitschy little phrase helps, market a book.
It also was a badass name, so
I get it. I'm poking the bear a little bit with it. I get it, but the book was never a screed against any specific political figure.
I felt the centricism.
Well, because look, I don't know any of them well enough to say what their nature is. I've met the president once. It was unpleasant, but this is way before he was president, so that's a whole different thing. So I have some personal beef with the president. You know what I mean? Like we got some old stuff to, but like that.
You'll talk it out someday. Don't worry.
Yeah, but that's not. Don't vote because of that. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's just whatever. But like, yeah, it wasn't that. It's just that I felt like the conversation was echo chambers yelling at each other, and what I wanted to do was approach it with the mess of human psychology and emotion, and do a crime story. Because here's the thing, and I'll say this to other writers that are out there. Look, I have nothing, I have nothing inherently against satirical fiction or even politically charged fiction. It's cool, but just realize that if your work is only a statement about the current politics that govern its creation, eventually it won't be relevant, right? Because politics change, the world changes.
That's a damn good thing to say.
I don't want my work to age like milk. I don't want it to be. I want someone in 2035 to be like, oh, I heard this was like a dope crime story. Yeah, there's like white supremacists in it, but like the characters were cool and it was violent here and it was, it was interesting, just to read it and enjoy it without having to know exactly the year that it came out and this is what was going on, because, that kind of work ages very quickly, and history moves faster than fiction a lot of times these days.
Yep.
And so, you might wind up behind the 8 ball. But it was a really fun experience, man. It was challenging to do. I hadn't done anything that in comics that wasn't like high genre, that didn't have an element of fantasy, you know.
The book didn't feel like something that should have come out monthly. It felt like I should have like a beer and just sit down with a big graphic novel and just have at it.
That was always my intention, is for people to sit down and just read it. You know, I wrote it with the graphic novelist's mindset. Okay. I'm not sure how well it presents in floppies, but as a whole experience, like 1.5 beers, you can probably get through while you were drinking it. I think it's solid, you know, and honestly, I thought when I wrote that I was going to be the villain of 50% of the YouTube channels in America, and was fully prepared for that. And to my surprise, revealing my own ignorance about how people enjoy things, I had people that were positive from, you know, across the political spectrum.
And that's good, because I hate to say it, but YouTube comment culture is absolutely just a shit show. Everyone finds a way to hate something. So if people on both sides go, "Oh, this is actually pretty good," you know,
lateral praise. I mean, but I had, you know what? I had people from all sides of the spectrum, you know, kind of coming at me, but I also had people from all sides of the spectrum that were really supportive. And what I learned, and because I'm a human and I'm flawed, so I have to keep learning this lesson, is you can't generalize people. You know, you can't assume based on something you might have seen someone tweet once, you cannot assume how they feel about everything all of the time. And
that's why in your book, you really did a good job of going, oh, this guy's not racist because he's white, and this guy's not a Democrat because he's black. They had their own story to tell, and they told it.
Well, I think we're way more complex like that as people, right? Like, here's the thing, and I'm not trying to take this into politics. I'm just speaking about this.
Go ahead, man.
Like a macrocosmic sociological sense. Here's the deal. So, you know, you got like 75 million people voted for this guy, 70 million people voted for that guy. Okay. The narrative can't be that these people over here, all of them hate these people over here. Because if that was true, Obama wouldn't have been president for 8 years. Right?
Damn right. And a lot of conservatives voted for him.
So while I do think there are issues, you know, within our country when it comes to, you know, just difference, race, gender, what have you, our legacy, America is a mixed up place, and we are wrestling with our own history, and we're figuring it out. We're getting better, right? Like, it's getting better. So I'm not discounting any of that stuff, you know, and look, people make up systems. And if people have certain biases, those biases might sneak into the system. It doesn't mean that the system is inherently built to, you know, or that, like, it's different. Like, we're people, right? Yep. Like the law is not interpreted by machines; it is interpreted by people. And so occasionally, human flaw gets into the picture, and we need to wrestle with it and deal with it. But we have to recognize our complexities, right? Like, and we have this urge to just put people in camps, these stupid camps, where, you know, you have to subscribe to this entire thing, and you're over here. And if you're over here, you got to subscribe to this entire thing.
And if you're not in between, like I am, I mean, if you're not on either side, like I am, you're in between, then you get pointed the finger at by both sides.
It's an unfortunate, you know, tribalism is bad. And I honestly think the reason we're so tribal, it is a unfortunate consequence of American success. And I will explain.
Okay, thank you.
Because America is the preeminent power in the world, and because we haven't had an external threat that has given us existential fear, we make enemies of each other. And this is kind of what happens to us a lot, right? And so because growing up,
we think we're untouchable, really.
I remember growing up in the 80s, and we were doing, you know, hide under your desk in case a nuclear bomb goes off in school. Like, school did this stuff.
Still, right? In the 80s?
Oh, in the 80s, oh, for sure. Like, in the 80s, nuclear Armageddon I grew up thinking about nuclear war.
Because we all know that if a nuclear bomb goes off, your desk will save you.
It's ridiculous when you think about it, but I remember the drills that you would do, where you would kneel down and you put the thing over your head and whatever, and you would go under your desk, and there was a mini series that came on NBC called The Day After that was all about nuclear war. So we lived under like existential threat, and then you had the Soviet Union, and then and the whole deal. So when America's kind of used to that, and when we don't have that for a while, then our neighbor becomes the threat. Then it's like, you know what? I don't think I like the way that sticker looks on his car. And then we start to obsess about it. You know what I mean? So I think it's just like it's a part.
I saw a news report like 2 years ago that's similar to that, where there was a feud between neighbors literally just like across the way, a street from each other, because one guy had the Republic sign of Star Wars, and the other guy had the United Earth Federation of from Star Trek, and so they would go back and forth just because they think, well, my movie's better. No, this movie's better.
And you can see it, right? It's like we argue about everything. When you got people coming to blows over Daisy Ridley, we need to just chill for a second, right? I'm not saying everyone needs to like everything. But we can dislike something and chill, it's cool. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Ariana Grande, but I'm not mad at people about it. It's cool. I don't know how to listen to it. I listen to what I listen to. This is good. It's all good.
And let's be honest, Ariana Grande, you can't be mad at someone for liking that. This isn't like the Reds and Blues East or Coast for East or West for Biggie or Tupac. Like, that's not even near that.
Everything doesn't have to be a war. Real talk. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Doesn't have to be a war. You can just not like something and move on. It's totally cool. Like, I promise.
Okay, let's get into. All right, people, start putting your questions in. So while we get through this next part, start putting your questions in. So we'll get to them here in a minute. I hope you don't mind going a little over. So your writing process, as you can see right here, mine is stickers and storyboards. Your writing process, I don't know what it is. I'd like to know. My friend Curtis, he said he talked to you and told him to read a book. And the book is actually by one of my Mount Rushmore writers of all time. And it's The Complete Book of Script Writing by J. Michael Straczynski. If you want to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, people ask me about what book should I get? Well, that book has a little bit of everything, but in enough amounts that if you really understand the principles of it, you'll understand script format, you'll understand dramatic structure, you'll understand scene structure, you'll understand the role of dialogue in writing.
And the difference of writing between TV and film.
And the business difference of writing and the format differences, right? So I think like that is here's a guide. If you want a guide, here's a guide. I think there's other books that are powerful, but they're not as universal. Like I would say Joseph Campbell's work is important to understand. Hero with a Thousand Faces, The Masks of God. To understand the anthropological, mythological connection we have towards heroes and the hero's journey. Probably good to study, right? But more applicable to some writing than other forms of writing. If you're writing legal thrillers, then being a master of Joseph Campbell, well, could probably help you because you could structure them out. Not particularly necessary if you want to be David Mamet.
Exactly. Oh, and you talked about on your YouTube channel the 3 questions of David Mamet.
And I'm like, Mamet's questions, right? What does a character want? What is standing in their way? What happens if they don't get it? Why now? Right? Yep. Those 4 kind of basic questions. And those questions, Mamet's work is good for that. So I'm really syncretic. I pull things from a bunch of different disciplines. I'm like a chaos magician of writing, right? Where I like a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. But Straczynski's book, and I talked to Michael about this kind of online, I think that book is, if you're looking to get one book, that's a book to get, because if you read that book and you really understand it, and if there's anything in there you don't understand, you search, you Google search, find some blog posts, whatever, and you really master an understanding of it, you'll be in a really good spot. It won't make you a professional writer like that, but what it will do is help give you the tools that you'll need to judge the quality of your work, so that you know how to push yourself towards being as strong of a writer as you need to be.
Good. That's if people want to write, there you go. Here's a question from Ash on Comics. How do you approach writing characters you don't know well? Do you find it different or more challenging than writing your own characters?
Depends on the character, but in general, if I'm approaching a character I don't know well, I first do some research. Just kind of read up the details of the character and all that kind of thing. And then sometimes I'll start to be a fan of the character from just doing the research. And by that meaning I'll hear the song of the character, like I might not have heard of the Beatles, but you play like I Want to Hold Your Hand, I start to like the Beatles, right? Yeah. So
or Hey
then
Jude.
Sometimes, I'll do some research on a character and take a deep dive in an academic way, and it'll be like listening to Rush or something. Like I understand this is interesting intellectually, but emotionally, I'm just not there. Then I'll either like reach out to see if I can talk to people who are fans of the character and find out what their personal connection is. That's generally a way I can get in. The other way I'll do it is I'll really look at the biographical details of the character and see if there's anything I can key into by taking a deeper look at the circumstances, right? So, like there's a character, like let's say Wonder Woman. I recently wrote a Wonder Woman digital story for DC, and it's not that I didn't like Wonder Woman. I like Wonder Woman. Everyone likes Wonder Woman. But what I really like, though, I grew up with Linda Carter, and she was cool, hot, and I had a crush, and I liked the movie, and I read some stuff. But, it wasn't like I was, like, what's the White Men Can't Jump? I was listening to Jimmy, but I didn't hear Jimmy. You know what I mean? So I was listening to Diana, but I didn't hear Diana.
Oh, man.
Then I just looked at her as a character and different things that people had written, and I kind of locked into this unflinching quality, like this kind of unassailable desire to not let the vices and personal failings of others corrupt her on her quest for justice, right? And I was like, okay, that part I can key into. And then I started to hear Diana. So usually it's just I have to, there's a Tennessee Williams play called Cat in the Hot Tin Roof. Paul Newman and Liz Taylor in the movie version. You should probably watch it. It's great. But Newman's character Brick talks about he drinks until he hears the click, and that's when he knows he can stop drinking. Okay. Same thing with research, right? Like I just look into the character, look at images of the character, talk to people about the character until I hear the click.
Okay.
And it happens fast. Sometimes it happens slow. Sometimes it happens on the third issue of something because your deadlines and you just can't wait to hear the click to write. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer before like it happens, but generally, yeah, I'm always kind of aiming at that.
All right. I'll do one more of my questions and then we'll just go straight to questions. Sure. You know what? Actually, you just answered like two more of my questions, so we'll just go.
Oh,
well, that actually worked out for the best. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Maranya. She said, Mr. Hill, what is the character or characters that are on the dream list to write about in comic books?
Well, thank you for your question. I would like to do something more in the supernatural space.
So
Constantine, like I wrote a version of Constantine in a series I wrote called Michael Cray, but it wasn't in universe Constantine. So if I was going to pick a character, it would probably be John Constantine. Because
are you mainly like a DC guy? Is like what your favorite?
No, actually, no. I was more of a Marvel guy growing up. I was a Batman guy and a Marvel guy. But my life has become, very kind of immersed in DC, as it were. Not that I mind. I mean, I like their universe as well. But yeah, I'd probably say John Constantine.
All right. Paolo, given the modern trend to write for the trade, how do you balance the need to have a satisfying story every issue while making a function as a part of a longer storyline?
Well, when you're working in 4 or 5 issue arcs, I tend to think of each issue almost like an act of a story, right?
Okay, nice.
So because I write a lot of screenplays which are feature length, you got about 110 to 125 pages, right?
That's a lot.
A lot of pages, right? So every act could essentially be an issue of a comic book. Now, if you have like 4 issues, that's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and then the 4th issue is the climax, and then the whatever. So if you kind of write towards your act breaks, you're going to have natural cliffhangers, because in a perfect structural world, when your act breaks in a screenplay, it should compel the reader to want to read the next act.
Yep.
Right.
Like that final page turn.
Like the final page turn. So with comics, it's the same thing. If I treat each issue like an act of the story, then in my structure, I have natural cliffhangers, which hopefully compel the reader to want to read the next issue. And then when they're all compiled, you can sort of feel the momentum of something that's more like a feature-length experience in a way, with every 4 or 5 issue arc, basically.
Your Outsiders did feel like a fucking movie, dude. Okay.
Well, that's for like writing TV for 3 years too. I mean, it's that's one of those things you just get. Once you keep doing it, you start thinking in act breaks, and that keeps you kind of just moving in that space.
All right. All right. Ash, again, heard you mention you didn't like linear monologue in comics. What do you have against it?
Oh, I don't have anything against inner monologue. In fact, like Frank Miller is probably my favorite comic book writer, who I think is incredibly gifted at inner monologue.
Well, you're speaking Ash's language, dude. Frank Miller is like the messiah to him.
I'm a huge Miller fan. I think Year One is probably one of my biggest influences in general. And so
that's probably one of my only Frank Miller books I like.
Yeah. It's so Frank is very, very good at it. So I'm not opposed to it, but it's just like narration in film. It can be a crutch if you're not careful, right? So what I say about inner monologue narration is it should never be saying something that the reader could pick up just from the image itself. It should always be adding something, like greater context, or maybe even challenging the nature of the image itself. If you notice, when Frank does it, he tends to do it against more meditative images of Bruce. Mm-hmm. So the panel work is Bruce standing in the shower. The inner monologue is, you are puny, you are weak, you can't hide me with the weight of age, like all the other Frank Millerism stuff, right? So you can tell I read the stuff because it's still in my brain.
Yeah, I could tell you read it more than 5,000 times.
Read it more than 5,000 times. I could kind of quote Dark Knight Returns, right? Because I'm that kid. But yeah, so it's not that I'm against it, Ash. It's just that you want to make sure that you need it, right? That it's providing necessary context. An example of what I think is terrible narration is the narration in the theatrical cut of Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner. Yeah, which the studio, we all know the story. The studio didn't like the original cut. They wanted more voiceover, and so they had, the writer, I think Hampton Fancher wrote the voiceover. Harrison Ford performed it and threw it in there. But if you read it, it's completely redundant. Everything that Deckard says in the voiceover is something that you're literally seeing on screen at the same time, So there'll be a scene about him being a Blade Runner, and then in the voiceover, it's like, yeah, they called me a Blade Runner. And I'm just like, okay, that is exactly what you don't want to do, right?
An example of a good one is Goodfellas.
Goodfellas is great because it's providing extra context, detail, things that, you wouldn't really know about, like you're seeing the guys in the kitchen cook, but you're also hearing them talk about, what the cooking means to them and the rest of it. So like Nicholas Pileggi, who's a master storyteller, knows how to use the juxtaposition of voiceover. So the same thing in comics. So I like inner monologue when it's good. I think it's fantastic when it works, but just make sure there's some juxtaposition going on, or it becomes redundant.
Okay, that's like I'm the reason I wanted you on here, because your fundamentalness of writing is like on key is what I
I
really
am,
wanted.
I'm like the Tony Dungy of writing, right? I am super fundamental stuff. Like, if I was a basketball coach, I'm just like, you dribble, you pass, you get open, you shoot. No showboating on my team. If I catch, I don't even care if you got the dunk. If you got the dunk doing something stupid, you are benched for the next quarter.
Coach Carter.
I'm Coach Carter, man. Like, I know fundamentals.
Okay. Did I miss
Blocking and tackling, baby. That's what we do. We block and we tackle.
Mariah, the second question is there a neglected character that you want to give a positive spotlight to?
Oh, I felt that way about Cassandra Cain, honestly. When I did Outsiders, she was really dynamic and interesting and hadn't really gotten the spotlight I think that she deserved. And I also felt that about Psylocke. In fact, the reason I did Fallen Angels in the first place was I didn't really see anyone doing much with Quanon when I saw what they were doing with that first round of X books, right? And
I don't even think I saw Quanon in Hawks and Pox.
Right? So I was like, okay, I don't see anyone touching base with this character. Elizabeth Braddock is going to go on, to be like Captain Britain, Psylocke, have the thing. So I'm like, all right, I want to do something with Quanon because I felt like she was getting left behind. And that was really where Fallen Angels came from. Now, in terms of characters I haven't done anything with that I think, could.
Please say Jon Stewart.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, I got to write. I just wrote a little bit of John in a short story that came out in one of the death metal things. But yes, Jon Stewart is certainly kind of one of them that I think I could do some damage with. But yeah. I mean that's like kind of the only one that kind of comes to mind. Really, I mean I got to work on both Cassandra and Quanon, and so those were big in my head. So I kind of crossed that bridge already in some ways.
Man, my two favorite characters of DC are Superman and Jon Stewart, and it hurts me that there's no Jon Stewart book out there.
It should be, right? There will be soon.
Especially in this day and age with all the stuff going on, there has to be a book.
There will be. It's going that way. I don't know anything, but I'd be shocked if we didn't get a Jon Stewart book.
All right, Ryuk. When writing a villain, what is the most important thing from a reader to take away from them? Okay, I see.
I think, and this is just my perspective on villains, that you want the reader to emotionally understand their point of view.
He also says, like when you wrote Killmonger.
Yeah, so with Eric, I wanted the reader to understand where he was coming from, right? To humanize, and they've done a lot of work in the film to do it, but by the time you reach him in the film, he's gone through a lot of experiences. And what I wanted to do was show a way that we could get there with him, right? And I invest a lot into the villains of my stories. I think a lot about the antagonist because really it's how I deal with my shadow self, right? Whether it's, Ra's al Ghul, or, Eric in the Killmonger series, kind of even Apoth and Fallen Angels, like all of it for me is a way to explore the darker aspects of my own psychology. Right. And so, and I guess I'm very Jung in that way, the thing about Carl Jung and like the shadow self and the rest of it. And I meditate, that kind of thing. So for me, it's important that the reader understand them as three-dimensional beings rather than simply obstacles in the place of the protagonist, like Jennifer in American Carnage, who I believe is the main antagonist of the book. The book kind of puts Win Morgan, her father, in center stage, but that's a bit of a red herring. I think she's really the main antagonist.
Yeah, I felt like she was the Cheney behind Bush when I was
kind of all of it, right? And I wanted to make her like a real person. So I guess if I'm going to be pithy, the one thing that I want a reader to experience from a villain is that they forget they're a villain.
Like Lex Luthor.
Like Luthor.
He truly thinks he's the savior of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do one more.
Thank you, Ash. I saw that comment. I appreciate that, man. I did put a lot of heart and soul in that book, so appreciate that, Ash.
All right. Let's end it on a fun thing right here. What's your top 5 Marvel books you read while growing up?
Oh, okay. In no particular order. Captain America. New Mutants, X-Men, Incredible Hulk, and what do I have? I got one more, Spider-Man. And that's probably it. Yeah, I mean, those were pretty much all I collected kind of growing up were those 5, and like other things too. And X-Men is a broad thing because X-Men is like everything from Claremont to the Jim Lee stuff, and probably the Jim Lee stuff is the most significant in the X stuff for me. So, oh no, I think Jimmy is frozen. Oh, it's just me. All right. Well, I don't know if Jimmy's going to come back, but let me look at your questions here. I'm just going to start looking at chat questions until Jimmy comes back and tells me not to. Okay, so back to music. What is my favorite classic synthesizer? Am I a Moog man or a Wurlitzer man? Moog, I guess, because that's kind of like the synthesizer I've probably used the most. But now I just do MIDI with a MIDI input thing, so it's different now. Let's see. Are there other questions I am missing here? Right for the trade, monologue. Okay, got to that question. Sorry, this is boring, guys. I'm just trying to sort of catch up with the questions here. I think I might have answered the bulk of them. New comments. What are my favorite bands or music groups? Well, I'm super into synthwave. So right now I'm listening to a lot of the Midnight. Those guys are good friends of mine. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're a vocal kind of retro pop synthwave group that I'm really into. There's a guy named Brandon who's got 2 albums that are, again, vocal pop synthwave. Retro Chrome 1 and 2. Those are fantastic. If you were to see my home office at night when my camera isn't stuck in autofocus because my hands are moving, you'd see like the synthwave lights that come on. So when the sun goes down, that thing behind me, that thing goes like sky blue. That lamp behind me goes like magenta. I've got a light over here that's like sky blue. So it turns into a whole like synthwave environment when the light go down. But yeah, I would say the Midnight is probably my favorite band at the moment. Check them out; they're great fellas, and they just had a live concert on stream that you can check out on their website. What types of heroes are the most challenging to write for? Comparing a street level hero to like a space hero or even a magic oriented hero. Okay, so what types of heroes are challenging to write for? I think that comes down to personal interest. I haven't done many cosmic heroes. So the space hero, for instance, isn't something I've done a lot of. Street level heroes I've done quite a bit of, and magic heroes as well. So I don't know, man. For me, the character is less about the world they're in, less about their skill set, and more about the character, right? Like, so I could write Picard better than I could write Kirk because I think just the nature of who I am. I'm more of a Picard person than a Kirk person. Like, I like Kirk as a character. I just probably think more like Jean-Luc Picard, right? Same thing like a magic character. I mean, Zatanna and John Constantine are both magic characters, but my Constantine is definitely much more in my wheelhouse than my Zatanna, right? So I think it's less about skill sets and worlds, and honestly just more about what is the nature of the character, what's the essence of that character.
Oh, dude, I'm so sorry. My internet just fucking crashed out of nowhere.
Oh, dude, it's all good. I used to DJ in college, right? So I'm used to being on the mic, and I was definitely going to keep the fires burning for you while you were working out your technical difficulties, man.
I appreciate it. I have 4 other people here who are all using the computer at the same time, so it's just I hope this didn't happen, but it did. Oh well, it wasn't too long. So I think we're gonna just end it. I appreciate that, man.
I'm happy to be here. I mean, look, this is the dopest part about being a creator is getting to talk to people about your work and getting to get feedback from people. And like I always say, and I mean it every time I say it, to everyone out there that's read my work, bought my work, taken the time to do all of those things, I genuinely appreciate it. It means a lot. Time is the best gift that you can give to a person. And the just knowing that, you know, I'm writing something here in my whatever my BS LA, you know, writer's office room, but that people like all over the world are taking a look at it and giving it the time. That means a lot. So appreciate that. Thank you all very much. And you know, just look, stay safe out there.
Real quick, before you
yeah, sure. What's up?
Before you leave, if you want to like, do you have any books coming out at Marvel or DC you want to like promote?
You know, I don't have anything coming out at Marvel or DC I can talk about.
Okay.
I have an original book called Chariot that is coming out through Axel Lonzo's shop. It's a miniseries. It's on the way.
Oh, the AWA Upshot?
AWA, yep. And I'm doing that with Priscilla Petrates, who's a super talented artist. She's so dope.
All those books have actually been really good.
yeah, they're like solid books, right? So that's a fun one. That's like me doing a Manga, basically. It's like an Manga Drive meets Tron thing, and that will make sense when you see the art. Okay. Besides that, can't really talk about the comic book stuff I'm doing, but you know, I am working on Titans season 3. I've been on Titans since the first season. So first 2 seasons are on HBO Max as I speak. You can watch them there. Season 3, we are shooting it at the moment. It should be really awesome. So I'm happy about that.
And Power Rangers too.
And Power Rangers, I'm getting ready to dig into that. That is upcoming for sure. And I wrote a movie called Zone 414.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about that.
I didn't have much to do with the production of it because it was happening in Ireland while I was here.
With Guy Pearce.
With Guy Pearce, Matilda Lutz, really cool. I haven't seen like the final cut of it, but I think the director did like a really interesting visual job with it, and it should be out at some point, sometime. Don't know when. But yeah, and you can find me on Twitter. It's at Bryan Edward Hill, or you can look up Illuminati. That is me on Twitter because I'm a one-man secret society.
Nice. All right, guys. I'll see you next week when we, not this Monday, tomorrow, but the following Monday, we'll be talking to Justin Greenwood, the co-creator of Stumptown. I'm excited to talk to him, and we'll see you then. Subscribe if you want. If not, oh well. I don't do this for the views. I do it just to talk to people. Subscribe. All right, guys. Have a good one, man.
All right. Stay safe, guys.